Good afternoon. So today I'm going to be sharing Romans 5, 1 through 5, and then I'm going to share something that I wrote and share some thoughts on that, and then I'm going to share John 16:33. When I read Romans 1 through 5, it's going to be in the New King James Version, and I really want to talk about kind of the center part of this. And how God, when we get saved, I think a lot of us expect that, like, when we go through something hard, we're going to pray about it, we're going to ask God to get us out of it, and then we're going to immediately have this miracle of God just bringing us out of all these hard things in life immediately. And then a lot of people, they don't resist, they don't strengthen themselves with the word, and they don't realize that, like, it's the enemy coming against them to try to cause them to falter, to fail, and they a lot of times either backslide or give up on what they're praying for or believing for. And God never gives us, like, sickness or disease or things that are bad, but sometimes we ourselves open the doors, and sometimes God will send tests and trials, but they're not necessarily a negative thing, and I'll explain that after I read this bit. But I just want you guys to know that, like, sometimes you're going to pray that God will get you out of a situation, and it is not going to happen immediately. And I've talked about this several times before, mostly because we are very much becoming a fast food, Burger King, have it your way type of world and type of people. If it's not immediate and it's not the way that we want it to be, then we get really upset that, we're not getting the things that we want when we want them as quickly as we want them. We're not getting the answer to a prayer fast enough, and not necessarily a healing prayer, although sometimes healing is gradual. When you're praying for it and you're expecting immediate miracle, don't stop standing because it doesn't show up right away. Keep standing, because sometimes it's happening and you just don't realize that you're getting better, and I'll go into something about that too. But I'm going to read this, and then we'll get into what I wrote, and then my thoughts on it, and then the other scripture. Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. Now hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts by the Holy Spirit who was given to us. And then this is what I wrote, and I actually posted this today from Instagram, but not everybody has Instagram, and I really wanted to expound on this a little bit more. You ever met someone and kind of know from the ignorance with which they speak that they've been really sheltered and haven't ever had to go through anything really difficult because they have a very naive take on hard things that other people are going through? Whereas the people who you meet in life who have been through really hard things in life, they're way slower to judge, give advice without thinking it through, or to give an opinion on something that's not their business. Sometimes God doesn't do an immediate miracle when you pray, because he's doing it in increments. So you can learn to stand against the attack of the enemy. So you can learn to persevere. So you can develop some character. Maybe you need to learn to be more humble, more forgiving, more merciful. Maybe you need to learn to give people grace, to learn how to love difficult people, or how to adapt to different personality types. Sometimes God will let you struggle, not to punish you, but to force you to grow past yourself and selfishness. Someone who has never faced real challenges is easily knocked down, knocked out, and discouraged when life suddenly becomes rougher than they've ever experienced. God wants us to be able to endure, to be able to stand the storms of life. Now I want to expand on that. There are a lot of things that I went through personally as a custodian that helped me to grow as a person. If you ever met me before I was a custodian and before I was a mom, you know that like I had a super, super bad gag reflex. I would smell something gross or see something gross and be ready to puke myself. And then I had kids, and my kids caused me to be more compassionate, more willing to deal with gross things, because if you've ever had children, you know that sometimes it's gross. They throw up, they spit up, they poop all over the place, they pee, and sometimes it gets on you. And so like you learn to kind of deal with some difficult things. You have to get up in the middle of the night. You have to put someone else first. You have to do a lot of things like that. Being a custodian was a completely different thing than I had ever had to deal with, because there was a lot of abuse in that workspace, unfortunately for me. I was treated very much like the trash that I took out. Like I was not worthy of people's time or politeness or their energy or effort. And I had to learn to be unbothered by a lot of things. And I got really, really good at being unbothered, being willing to jump in and do things that other people were not willing to do, to figure out how to make things workable that were not workable. And I did a really great job as a custodian when given reasonable expectations and a actual manageable standard to uphold. Unfortunately, eventually the standard kept being raised while the work expectations kept being raised, while the workload also kept being increased, and it became the impossible job, which is kind of hilarious because it was always the impossible job. My sister subbed for me a couple times when I had appointments for things, and every time she subbed for me, whether it was the nighttime or the daytime, she always said, "You have the impossible job." The problem with being somebody that works hard is more often than not, if you're willing to work hard, people are willing to take advantage of that. And I had to learn how to deal with different personality types. I had to learn how to do what I was told without questioning it at times, even when it didn't make sense and it wasn't a good way to do it. I had to really humble myself and not get caught up in how I was treated, because I was always being treated like I was less by people who thought that they were better than me because they were educated, which you had to learn how to just, God, I know that I'm not worthless, and I know that I have value, and I thank you, Lord, that you see that. Being a custodian was the best, worst thing that ever happened to me in my life, because I learned how hard custodians really do work, and I respect people who are custodians or who have manual labor jobs so much more than I ever did before I worked a manual labor job. I was very naive about how hard that job was going into it, and I can honestly say that I did not have the respect for that position that I should have before going into it. And I learned how to respect people who are in those positions so much more by doing that job. And there are some things that you only respect once you've done them, because you really just don't know. Like I said, there are people who are very sheltered in life, and you can tell that they've been very sheltered and they've had a very easy life, whether it's financially or emotionally or mentally or all of the above. When you meet someone like that, it's not that you hate them, but you're like, oh, you don't really know anything. And you kind of almost pity them in a way, because you're like, eventually life will become hard. And I feel bad for the day when life becomes hard for you, because you are not going to know how to handle this difficulty, because nothing has ever been hard for you before. And this is going to be so much worse for you in a way. And I feel like God creates tests and trials to help us not be those people. Because he does love us, because he knows the enemy will come to attack. He will come to steal, kill, and destroy. He will come to rob you of your joy and your peace and your life. And God creates tests and trials that we are able to withstand, that we are able to get through. He's not creating impossible standards. He's not raising the bar constantly where you can't reach it. But he will always be pushing you to be your best self. When I was a custodian, I went back and forth in my faith with God. But when I was doing well, I would ask God to help me. Because like my first 2 years there, I worked on the night shift. 2 or 3, something like that. But I worked night shift, and it was really, really difficult because the person that I took over for had too much work put into a schedule that was humanly possible. It was a schedule created essentially to sabotage him into quitting. And then I was given the schedule with no maps of the schools, no training on how to do my job, and this expectation that I would just jump in. And it did not happen. It did not go well. And I had to start saying, I need training. I need a map. I need somebody to walk me through and show me these buildings. You're expecting me to clean rooms I've never seen, I've never been in. I didn't grow up in this state. I didn't go to the school district. I don't know where any of these things are. So the standard that you're setting is unrealistic, and I can't accommodate you. And I got training, and I was so grateful for the training that I got. But there were certain things that along the way, I would be like, God, this person isn't being reasonable, and the way that they're treating me isn't right. And I need help, Lord. I need you to help me see this person like you do. I need you to help me find a way to be compassionate. Give me a second. My husband is leaf blowing outside, and it's really loud. But I would ask God, help me have compassion for this person. Help me see this person the way that you do, because the way that they're treating me is so bad. And I want to walk in love with them, Lord, but I don't know how to walk in love. And God did not take me out of these situations. God helped me to grow as a person. There were certain people when I worked the night shift that worked in the district office, people that were my bosses, that did things that were just disrespectful of me as a custodian and of the other people in the office around them. They would ask me to come into their office and clean up like 3 pieces of popcorn that they just dropped on the floor, and rob time from me cleaning other people's offices so that I could clean theirs. And that was wrong of them. But I did it because they were in charge of me. And so I obeyed what I was asked. And I did what I was supposed to, but it was one of those things where that abuse of power made me so frustrated and angry. And I'd be like, God, get me out of this. God, help me out. And instead of getting me out of it, God showed me those people as human beings. There was another person who did not like how I cleaned the windows. They were never clean enough for them, to the point where I literally had to go out and sand/polish the outside of the windows, because for some reason the sprinklers were set so that they would directly spray on the windows and build calcium. And I had to go try to polish/sand that calcium off the glass windows. And it didn't matter how hard I tried or what I did, it wasn't good enough. And I was like, Lord, I'm doing my best. Like, I'm doing everything that I can, and it's not enough. And I want to be hateful. I want to be bitter. I want to be angry. I want to scream. I want to yell, Lord, this is wrong. Like, what's happening is wrong. How I'm being treated is so bad. And God didn't take me out of that situation. God showed me this person as a human being, the struggles that they were going through, that their mother had dementia, that they'd lost their son when they were a teenager, that like they had a life that was difficult, and that this person might not have control everywhere else in their life. So they were controlling what they could, which was me. And instead of becoming bitter and angry, I learned to accept that this is the way this person is, and that they're never going to treat me good. And this is just how this situation is going to be. and I am going to be the bigger person, and I am going to walk in love, and I'm going to pray for them. I'm going to pray that God blesses them. I'm going to pray that God helps them in their life, that God helps them with these situations that are hurt and are difficult and are so just like, there are some things in life that are so hard, they affect the rest of your life. And so like, instead of becoming bitter, I just started praying for this person, and they did not become a better person. They just eventually quit or retired or whatever. But I decided that I was going to grow and walk in love, and it was not an easy choice to decide to be a better person. It was not an easy choice always to have a boss come to me and be like, I need you to start cleaning this as well, and be like, I have literally no room on my schedule. I don't know how you want me to manage that. Or have another classroom added to me, and then another classroom, or have another thing added to my schedule. And it wasn't physically, humanly possible for me. And it became one of those situations where the only reason that I was able to do so many of those things was because God gave me grace to do it. And I did everything that I possibly could to endure, to humble myself, to forgive, to walk in love, to build my character as a person, and to persevere through situations that it was like, if this was anyone else, they would have quit. They would have walked away. And the reason I didn't is because I have a family, and I had money coming in that was supporting my family and my kids and my husband and I and our life. And so I stayed in that job until eventually they attempted to fire me for not meeting workplace standards, even though I had been asking for help for a really long time. And that is when I eventually quit my job. But I quit because it had become a situation that was so toxic that I literally was prepared to commit suicide. And I left. And I'm grateful that I left that situation. But I'm also grateful to have gone through that job and that situation, because I learned to be unbothered. I learned to deal with the gross things. I learned to deal with people who had very different personality types than me. I learned to have compassion for people that made it really hard to have compassion for them. I learned to do things that were hard that I might not have learned before if I hadn't been in that job. I learned how sometimes it doesn't matter how much you're doing what's right, other people will not do what's right by you. And that's not saying that that's okay, but that's how the real world is, the world outside of God. Now, if I had been leaning on God the entire time like I should have been, things probably would have gone a lot better. But there are a lot of things that I am grateful for that came out of me being in that situation and being in those places in my life where I was treated poorly, because I had grown up in church with a church family that loved me and adored me and treated me so well that when I went out into the real world, a part of me was not ready to be treated like that. Because while I had done hard things and dealt with hard things and been through hard things, I was held back as a child. I eventually dropped out of high school because I just wasn't getting it. I eventually went and got my GED. Like, I had done hard things. I'd been through hard things. I knew what it was like to be held back and be bullied. Because I was held back, I knew what it was like to be bullied for being a preacher's daughter. I knew what it was like to deal with criticism from church people that wanted me to live but up to a standard that they weren't even necessarily always meeting themselves. Like, I knew what it was like to go through hard things. But the level of difficulty in that job prepared me for other things. And then there were other relationships that I've gone through and things that I've been through in my life. The job is just the easiest one to explain without offending anyone in my personal life, maybe, because I don't want to offend people. because like a lot of things that I've been through that are difficult with people in my personal life have been worked through, and those things no longer either bother me or are an issue in that relationship. But you're going to go through things in life that are hard, and you're going to pray, God, get me out of this. And maybe he won't. Maybe he'll do it in increments. Every time I was like, God, I don't think I can stand this thing anymore, God provided a way out of that situation. And I was like, God, how long do I stay here? How long? And I stayed to the point where God had to help me recover, because I stayed too long in situations that were abusive or I didn't report. Honestly, my problem was that I never reported abuses as an employee that I should have reported. And that was my fault. I should have definitely been writing down and recording things that were wrong that were done to me and reporting them to superior people that could have dealt with them as they were done. But I am not that type of person. I'm the type of person, I show up, I do my job. If you have complaints because they don't kiss your rear end, that's not my fault. I will never suck up to someone just to make them like me. I will show up and I will do my job to the best of my ability. But if you ignore me when I tell you, hey, I need help, or hey, I'm struggling in this area, this is no longer my issue. You didn't listen to me. And that's unfortunately my personality issue that I have to work on, is that I need to learn to report abuses when they happen and not just be like, well, I'm used to being treated badly. And there are certain things in that God has dealt with me with. I am so much less willing now to accept mistreatment, and I'm more willing to speak up for myself than I was before. If somebody is treating me poorly, I am more likely to be like, no, you don't get to talk to me like that, and you don't get to treat me like that. I will walk in love with you and I will be kind to you, but you do not get to treat me badly. But I'll never be the lawsuit happy, mean, willing to be petty, willing to be cutting or hurtful. That's not me. And so it's just one of those things where, like, some of the things that you're going to go through in life, they're going to be so hard. And you're going to be like, God, I don't understand why I'm not being let out of this. And maybe the thing that you're wishing God would let you out of, he's using for a reason. And I'm going to use my wedding as an example. Sorry, I was baking cookies earlier, so I might have some flour on me. At my wedding, there was a woman that showed up. My wedding was very, very private. We had only family there because we didn't even have all of our family there, but we had most of my immediate family, Jamie's mom and his stepdad, who we absolutely love and adore, and my stepson Mason, who it was so important to us that he was there because I wanted him to be a part of it. It was such a big deal for me and my husband that he got to be there, because he's freaking awesome. But anyways, it was a huge deal for us to have him there. But we really only had family. Well, then the pastor of the church that let us borrow the church, because my dad did my wedding, but we were allowed to borrow the church for my wedding because we did the cooking, we did the cleaning, we didn't leave a mess or anything, but they allowed us to, for free, use the church. And I am so grateful for that to this day. But they ended up showing up with their son and his, I think maybe a few of their sons, and their oldest son's girlfriend, who's now his wife. But they showed up, and she had a very type A personality, and she rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I was never bothered by her. But if you are a type B person, I really don't know all the types, but I know what a type A is, because I know that I'm not. But she was a very type A person. She was very put together, very kind of more serious and a little more flat emotionally with the way that she spoke about things. And I was so grateful for all my time in the school district at that point, because had I just been listening to her words and not paying attention to the entire picture, which I think is the problem with most of us. We'll hear what people say, we'll hear their tone, and we'll think that that's how they meant things. And one of the things that I learned from being in the school district and learning other people is that sometimes the way that people say things or their tone isn't how they mean it. And so like watching this girl, she came out, she's got tears in her eyes. She's obviously been crying. And she says to me, "Beautiful wedding." Just like that tone, that voice. And if I had only been listening to the tone, I would have thought she didn't like my wedding. But I could see that my wedding had moved her by looking at her. And so often, if we are not put in situations with people that have different personality types than us, we don't see that they don't mean things the way that they sound to us. Another time, a family member of mine had a car accident. And everyone was very, very scared and very worried. And there was another person that was asking, "Well, do you have insurance?" And everyone was like, "Why does that matter? We're just checking to see if she is okay, da-da-da-da-da." And the funny thing is, I understood that that person was also showing care, because that person was making sure that they wouldn't have to worry later on down the road about this thing, and that they could just be concerned about their physical safety and their health and all that right now, and was trying to, in a different way, take care. But that person's idea of caring shows up different than my family's very messy, very emotional way of caring. And so when you are around different kinds of people, you can see that this person is asking this question, but really what they're asking is, "Are you okay? Do you need me to do anything for you? Do you need help in a different way that nobody else is providing help in?" And that's the thing, is God will put you in situations sometimes with people that you're like, "God, I want you to get this person away from me, and I want you to get them away from me now." But maybe God's put them in your life to help you grow, to stretch you. Or maybe God has put them in your life because you are the only person that will pray for them, the only person that will engage with them, the only person that will take time to pay any attention to this person. Sometimes people are put in your life on purpose by God because you're it. You're the only one. And that's the thing, is like so often we're like, "God, fix my problem here." And God's saying, "Okay, I'll fix your problem here, but I want you to go through this thing. And when at the end of this thing, your problem's going to be fixed." A great example of this is Lester Summerall. Lester Summerall was trying to start a church in the Philippines. And he was dealing with all these blocks when starting a church. There was all this political corruption, and they wanted him to bribe them so that he could start a church. But he didn't even have the money to bribe them. So he was praying and believing God to help him start this church. And on the radio, because there's no like stuff like what we have, there's no media today like what we have, is all radio and stuff like that back then. This broadcast comes on, and there is this girl in prison in the Philippines, and she is demon possessed. Like, they can see visible bite marks showing up all over her body, and nobody can figure out how to help her. They've called in priests, they've called in doctors, and this thing has used this girl to say, "You're gonna die," and then the priest and the doctor the next day died. So, like, nobody is able to help this girl. And Lester Summerall's getting ready for his day, and God goes, "I want you to go, and I want you to cast this out." And Lester Summerall says, "God, I'm trying to start a church in the Philippines. Send someone else." And continues to get ready throughout his day. And he'd already been praying the night before for this girl because he'd heard about this over the radio, and it broke his heart, and he was praying for her. And all morning long as he's getting ready, God is telling him, "I want you to go and cast this demon out." And Lester Summerall just keeps trying to push it off and going, "God, this isn't going to help me. I'm trying to start a church in the Philippines. This isn't going to help me. This isn't going to help me." And eventually he's going to get into his car, and God says, "If you don't do this, I don't have anybody else." Which always devastates me every time I hear the story told, because imagine God saying, "I don't have anyone else." The Philippines is not a small place. Imagine God saying, "I have No one else. And Lester Sumrall is like, it makes you feel good when God says he doesn't have anyone else. But I have also heard him tell, because I have his documentary in my house, the book, and I've read it, and he talks about how heartbreaking it was. That in the entirety of the Philippines, God had no one else that was willing to go. And he went, he cast the demon out of the girl. You can look this story up. Her name is Clarita something. And it's Bilibid Prison. You can look this story up. You can probably Google it. Google didn't exist back then. Google didn't even exist when I was a baby. But you could probably Google this now. But it's a real story. It really happened. He went, he cast the demon out. The governor, mayor of the Philippines, whatever it is, the leader, whatever, I can't remember who he was. But he goes to Lester Sumrall after he does this thing, because this is like becoming a huge issue for them in that nation. It's all over the news. It's everywhere. And he goes, what do you want? And he goes, well, I've been trying to start a church. And he green lights his church. And then he says, and I'd like to have an open air meeting in your town square or your city square, whatever it is. And he green lights it. And God opened all these doors because Lester Sumrall obeyed God and did what he was asking. All these things that we're asking God to remove from our lives sometimes are sometimes things that God is using to help us grow, help us change, help us to be better today than we were yesterday. To help us to do things that in our future we're going to need to do. In my life, the things that God has put that I thought were blocks have helped me to be really laid back about a lot of things. I will walk into places and have people treat me badly and laugh it off. And that is a really important skill to have sometimes, to be able to go out into the world and be unmoved. Now, if it's someone that I love and I care about deeply and they treat me badly, do I feel that same way? Not always. Sometimes it takes me a minute to like, God, I forgive this person and I ask you to help me to walk in love because I'm real big mad right now in this moment and I want to have a fight. But when it's random strangers or random people that are treating me bad, I am easily able to whatever. When people look down on me, I'm able to laugh about it because you're not the first one to underestimate me. You're not the first one to look down on me, and you won't be the last one, and that's okay. You underestimate me, you look down on me, and you get to miss out on who I am as a person and what I have to offer. I have grown so much, and I'm willing to jump in and help out. I'm willing to do the gross things. I'm willing to do the things that a lot of other people aren't willing to do, or talk to the people that other people want to ignore because they have personality issues with them. I'm able to push past myself in a lot of ways that I wasn't able to before I took that job. So we all need to realize that in John 16:33, God says, or Jesus says, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrow, but take heart because I have overcome the world. If you are renewing your mind in the Word, you're walking in love, you're walking in forgiveness, you're walking with God, and you're trying to actually live by the standard that God has set for us to live by, which is the example that Jesus lived. If you are actually trying to meet that standard, God will give you peace. He'll give you grace. He'll help you through the trials and tribulations. He'll help you through the sorrows and the hurts. He'll help you to endure, to persevere. But you have to be willing to do things sometimes that other people aren't willing to do, like Lester Sumrall did. You need to be willing to grow and to forgive. Sometimes the things that God wants you to deal with are your personality issues. Sometimes he wants you to forgive when no one deserves it, when nobody has earned it. And not to forgive necessarily for that person's sake, but to forgive so that you can live free of bondage that the devil is trying to hold you in. Most of us don't realize that the unforgiveness that lives in us holds us hostage. We're We're standing at the bars of a cage we're not even in. The best example I ever heard of this was that we're not the ones in a prison. The devil's the one in a prison. And what he does best is he lies to us, and he has us this close to the bars so that we can't see that it's not us in prison, that it's him in prison. And if we would just let go of things and turn around, we'd see how free we are. But because we don't listen to God, because we listen to what the enemy is saying, we can't see that the one that's not in prison is not us, but him. And we're just listening to the lies. We're just falling for the lies. We're just believing the lies. And if we would just listen to God, let go of unforgiveness, let go of things that have happened in the past, and turn around, we'd see how free we are, how much freedom God has provided for us, how much healing and wholeness, how much things in life that God has for us. But we're missing out because we're praying for God to get us out of things immediately, instead of realizing that sometimes we need to deal with things incrementally. We're not ready for things to come to us immediately. And God is trying to help us grow in patience, help us to grow in kindness, help us to grow in our willingness to obey him. One of the things that I learned in that job was the willingness to obey what my boss would tell me to do, even if they were wrong. And even if the thing that they asked me to do didn't make a lick of sense, if it didn't make even 1 ounce of sense, in the sense of like, well, I could do that, but I could do it this way and it would actually be done better and quicker and more efficiently. But you're asking me to do it this way, or hey, you're asking me to do a job that's not mine, when the people that could do this job and are supposed to be doing this job aren't doing anything. I know that they're sitting around in their office on their rear end not doing anything, and you're asking me to do it. That doesn't make sense, but I'm going to do it anyway because you asked me to. And that was hard. That was hard to know that, like, there were other people that should be doing certain things and they weren't doing their job. And now I'm being asked to do somebody's job just because they're lazy and I'm a hard worker. And instead of you going to the person that's not a hard worker and making them actually do their job because you don't want to deal with it, you're putting that on me. And now I have to go do somebody else's job because they're lazy. And I did it anyways. So often. So much so that it was a joke. It was like a running joke with everyone that, like, yeah, this person doesn't work. And if you work with them, you're going to have to do the work for them because they won't do it. And it got to a point where it was like, okay, God, like, I'll do the thing that people who are supposed to do it aren't willing to do. Because I'm willing, God, and I'm able. And I will humble myself. And I will put my pride and my ego aside. And I'll do the thing that you've asked me to do. And sometimes those things that are so hard are the things that God is using to grow you. And it is not always easy. Sometimes it's so hard to just be obedient. And you just have to take the step of faith. Even if it's forgiveness, even if it's walking in love and you're like, God, I don't feel like doing this. I don't want to do this, but I want to do this because you asked me to. And I'm going to do it as a step of faith, trusting you. Sometimes you just have to do forgiveness as a step of faith. Sometimes you just have to do obedience as a step of faith. Sometimes you just have to walk in love as a step of faith in God and his goodness and what his word says. You read the word and you believe it and you do it, even when you don't feel like it. Sometimes you just have to say, God, I'm sorry that I was afraid and I'm sorry that I doubted. Because in your word it says to not be afraid and to not doubt and to not walk in unbelief. And I'm sorry that I did. And I'm going to do this thing even though it doesn't make sense. And even though a part of me is still scared, I'm going to trust in you. And I'm going to be obedient. And I'm going to do what you asked me to do. And God will bless you. Sometimes it's not going to happen overnight. So I just wanted to come on here and kind of expound on what I had written. And just let you guys know that sometimes the things that we pray for, they don't happen immediately. And it doesn't mean that God doesn't hear us. Like I said before, sometimes the enemy is resisting us. Sometimes God has sent the answer. And you just need to keep praising and worshiping God and thanking Him that the answer's been set. But sometimes the reason that He has you in this thing is because He's developing your character, your ability to endure. And I'll end with this. I heard a story about these scientists that created this environment. And they created this environment to be the perfect environment for growth, theoretically. But when the trees in this environment started to grow, they fell over almost immediately as soon as they reached a certain height. And they couldn't figure out why until they realized that the winds that buffer trees actually help their roots to grow deeper and further out and to spread out so that they have more stability, have a more stable base. Sometimes it's the winds that blow in life, the things that toss you about, the things that you're like praying for God to take away, that create a person able to stand in the storm the enemy will bring against you. So that's all I have for today. I pray that God blesses you and that you have a great day. And goodbye.